Did Einstein know the Nagasaki bomb was almost a dud? First, some background. In over 1,000 lectures over the decades, Einstein taught tens of thousands of physics students. What are the chances that one of those students would end up fixing a problem with the Nagasaki bomb, one that Einstein made possible, at the last minute? Here's that student. George Reynolds was a Rutgers 1939 graduate and physics PhD candidate at Princeton University from 1940 to 1943. During that time, he attended a number of seminars on statistical mechanics conducted by Albert Einstein. Reynolds recalled that Einstein's manner was so modest, quiet, and kind that I did not feel overwhelmed. Little did Einstein know, much less Reynolds himself, what a series of zigzag experiences would ineluctably lead him to the bomb known as the Fat Man. Besides his exposure to Einstein, he had numerous interactions with other Princeton professors involved in the war effort. One notable set of experiences began with his PhD thesis advisor, John von Neumann. Von Neumann was one of the most brilliant men in history, a key developer of the very first computers, developer of game theory, quantum mechanics pioneer, and a speaker of 5 languages. At a young age, he could multiply large numbers together, memorize the entire Budapest phone book, and memorize many books by heart. And most relevant here, he was a critical player in the development of the atomic bomb. Reynolds and von Neumann collaborated closely on theorizing and experimenting about refractions and reflections of shock waves. Von Neumann would develop theories, and Reynolds would test them via explosions in the woods near Lake Carnegie. This was to confirm and refine the theories. In one case, probably involving TNT, an explosion blew out windows and broke china 2 miles away. In 1942, Reynolds went to the 70,000-acre Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland for a few months to study the effects of bombs on German pillboxes. And you can see one of those on the upper left. He then went on to the 35,000-person Camp Gruber in Oklahoma to study the effects of bombs on German structures. Reynolds' PhD thesis was informed by these expeditions. It was entitled Studies in the Production, Propagation, and Interactions of Shockwaves. This background teed him up for experiences leading him to Tinian Island in the Marianas in July of 1945. Starting in 1942, a well-kept secret around Princeton University was that Los Alamos was developing atomic bombs. With his background, Reynolds was invited to deploy to the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, but he turned them down. Why? He wanted action and quick results. So in 1943, he enlisted in the Navy, where he was scheduled to train in the demolition of landing obstacles in amphibious warfare. But destiny had other plans for him. On June 15, 1943, he got a telegram. Proceed in 4 days to Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was ordered to go to Los Alamos. He was overruled, and he was ordered specifically to go without his wife, Virginia. But as a determined young man, he protested up the chain of command to General Groves, who allowed Virginia on board. Chivalry was not dead. At Los Alamos, his assignment was to work on the detonation system of plutonium-based bombs. The Trinity bomb test and the Nagasaki bomb were plutonium-based. The Hiroshima bomb was uranium-based. Reynolds was not the only Princeton scientist secretly summoned to Los Alamos. Einstein suspected something was afoot when, in 1943, many high-level scientific friends of his in Princeton, at least 4 of whom were or became Nobelists, suddenly disappeared, out of contact. and here are some of them. As a blast expert, Reynolds' other job was to estimate the anticipated effects of an atomic bomb. He said, "We had very few examples of large explosions. They had only been able to explode half a kiloton of TNT, but an atomic bomb could go up to 20 kilotons. The Hiroshima bomb turned out to be 15 kilotons." Just a year into his stint at Los Alamos, on July 17, 1944, the second largest human-caused explosion in history occurred in Port Chicago, California, just off San Francisco Bay. A military ship was loading 429 tons of bombs. Another ship had 4,600 tons of bombs on board when the loading ship exploded, followed quickly by an explosion on the second ship. The blast obliterated everything within 1,000 feet, sending up a cloud 12,000 feet high, killing 320 personnel and injuring 390 more. George Reynolds was immediately dispatched from Los Alamos to Port Chicago to provide a detailed analysis of the blast results. He calculated that the detonation was the equivalent of approximately 1,500 tons of TNT, or 1.5 kilotons. While the Los Alamos scientists knew that an atomic bomb would be highly destructive, this kind of analysis helped them extrapolate what 20 kilotons of TNT would do to a city. By about the middle of 1944, the scientists at Los Alamos knew atomic bombs would weigh up to 10,000 pounds. Luckily for history, that was also about the weight limit of what a B-29 could carry. So, to test ballistics involved when such a large bomb was dropped, dozens of B-29 flights were flown out of Wendover Air Base, Utah. Reynolds was on board for a number of these, along with Charles Sweeney, who later became the pilot on Boxcar, the B-29 which dropped the Nagasaki bomb. The 10,000-pound dummy bombs they dropped were dubbed pumpkins. The brilliant brain trust of key scientists at Los Alamos, including Nobel Prize winners, knew that the plutonium bomb needed a specific implosion of explosives to encircle the plutonium core to trigger a nuclear reaction, but they couldn't come up with an exact solution. So in mid-1943, Robert Oppenheimer summoned Reynolds' advisor, John von Neumann, to Los Alamos in a last-ditch effort to solve the issue. Within weeks, he conceptualized explosive lenses, combinations of fast and slow high explosives, to shape a converging shock wave, and he calculated the required compression velocities and pressures. Without von Neumann, history would have changed. Then, Reynolds and 30 others were sent from Los Alamos to Tinian Island, arriving in mid-July 1945. His job involved detonation firing units, circuitry, ignition systems, etc. on the Nagasaki bomb. Fat Man. This was named after Sidney Greenstreet, an actor in the Maltese Falcon movie. Leaving nothing to chance, Reynolds and B-29 crews flew 13 test bombing runs over Japan in the weeks leading up to the real atomic bomb explosions, testing 10,000-pound cargoes with conventional explosives. At 15,000 feet, with no parachute, Reynolds would go down into the bomb bay to check the connections. It was the night of August 8, 1945, just hours before the Nagasaki-bound boxcar B-29 took off. After years of study, multiple experiences with blast issues, and repeated in-depth experience with the Fat Man in Los Alamos and Tinian, Reynolds' intuition kicked in. As he relates, "I was lying in bed and thought, I'd like to ring out those circuits one more time. So I went over and said, 'Barney, let's go. We're going to check them.'" This was his assistant, Barney O'Keefe. The most critical wiring on the bomb the 64 bridge wires that triggered the 32 explosive devices that surrounded the core of plutonium. To make the bomb work, these devices had to go off in a highly challenging series of tenths of a microsecond. Reynolds went on, and by golly, we did find one wire was wrong. One wire was interchanged. Well, we corrected it. Needless to say, without Reynolds' intimate knowledge of that bomb circuitry, Fat Man would have been one big fat dud. While a third bomb was ready to be dropped on August 19, 1945, there was no guarantee it would work. Plus, strategically, it was critical for the U.S. to drop the second bomb in days to convince the Japanese we had many atomic bombs ready to go. If the third bomb didn't work either, the U.S. would have had to proceed with a double invasion of Japan. First, on November 1, 1945, a landing of 700,000 troops on the island of Kyushu. Then, on March 1, 1946, 1.5 million troops landing on the island of Honshu. By comparison, D-Day involved 300,000 troops in the first week. It has been estimated that 100,000 U.S. troops and 7 million Japanese would have died. In an interview for Rutgers University in 1999, Reynolds, in one of the great understatements of history, described the near last-minute fix as a near thing. Without Reynolds, history would have also changed. At 3:47 a.m. on August 9, 1945, the boxcar B-29, piloted by Charles Sweeney, took off from Tinian and dropped Fat Man over Nagasaki at 11:01 a.m. local time. The Japanese surrendered 6 days later. Of course, Einstein knew of this bombing, but because George Reynolds' interview was published in 1999, 44 years after Einstein's death, Herr Professor never knew about the near thing. The story reminds us of the wisdom of the popular, very old proverb concerning one wire change, without which history's biggest war would have had its biggest, most deadly invasion. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the battle was lost. For the want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail.